Who were the Nephilim? Today we are going to explore the mysterious story of the Nephilim through three different ancient texts: the Canonical Bible, the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Jubilees. These three accounts each offer a different angle on the identity of the Nephilim, how they came into existence, and what role they played both in the physical world and the spiritual realm. We'll begin by carefully walking through the account given in the Canonical Bible. This will set the foundation for our understanding. Then, we'll move into the Book of Enoch, which gives a much more detailed picture of the events leading up to the arrival of the Nephilim and the consequences that followed. After that, we'll explore the Book of Jubilees, which adds even more layers to the story and gives us a fuller picture of how these events were remembered and passed down through ancient traditions. Throughout this journey, we will guide you step by step, using rich and thoughtful narration to bring the story to life. Each section will help you see not only what these ancient texts say, but also how they connect and build upon one another. I invite you to like and subscribe to our channel. Just a one click for you, but means a lot to me. All right, let's begin. The first time we hear about the Nephilim in Scripture is during one of the most mysterious and debated sections of the book of Genesis. In chapter 6, we are brought into a world that was unraveling, a time when the line between heaven and earth was being crossed in ways no one had ever seen before. As the passage begins, we're told that as people began to multiply on the earth, daughters were born to them. Then something unusual happens. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives, choosing freely from among them. This strange union led to the birth of the Nephilim, described as mighty men, men of renown who were on the earth in those days and even after that. What makes this moment in Genesis so mysterious is how little information we're actually given. The identity of these sons of God is never clearly explained. Some believe they were fallen angels, celestial beings who stepped out of their intended place and took on human form, breaking the boundary God had set. Others believe they were the descendants of Seth, the righteous son of Adam, who intermarried with the line of Cain, a line marked by rebellion. Another view is that these sons of God were human rulers, kings who saw themselves as divine and took women as they pleased. No matter which view a person holds, there is one thing that stands out. This union was outside of God's design. Something about it was unnatural. The children born from it, the Nephilim, were not just large or famous. They were a sign that something had gone terribly wrong in the world. These Nephilim are not described in great detail, but their presence marks a shift. They were not ordinary people. They represented the breakdown of what God had originally intended. Their appearance happens right before God announces that humanity has become deeply wicked and that he would bring a flood to cleanse the earth. While the Nephilim are not directly blamed for the flood, their presence fits into the larger story of a world filled with violence and corruption. The world was no longer just sinful. It had been touched by something darker. These giants are described as heroes, but in the very next breath, the Bible speaks of a world so twisted that God's heart is deeply moved by grief. The phrase men of renown suggests that the Nephilim were admired during their time. They may have been warriors, kings, or figures whose names carried weight in stories passed down. But from God's perspective, their existence was not a reason to celebrate. People looked up to them, perhaps even worshiped them, but their strength and influence came from a place of rebellion. The fact that society praised these figures only made things worse. The world had become so lost that it celebrated the very things that were drawing it further away from God. The Nephilim weren't just part of the problem, they were a reflection of how deeply the world had accepted what was not from God. After Genesis, the Nephilim vanish from the storyline, at least for a time, but they reappear briefly in the Book of Numbers during a crucial moment in Israel's journey. After escaping slavery in Egypt and wandering through the wilderness, the Israelites came to the edge of the Promised Land. Moses sent 12 men to scout the land of Canaan to see what lay ahead. When those spies returned, most of them were terrified. They spoke of cities with high walls, strong warriors, and people who looked like giants. Then came a chilling line. "We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Enoch come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This verse shows us how powerful the legend of the Nephilim had become. The spies were so frightened by what they saw, or thought they saw, that they compared themselves to insects. Whether they actually saw Nephilim, or were using the name to describe people who seemed impossibly strong, their fear was real. The name Nephilim carried weight. It brought to mind beings whose size and strength went beyond normal human limits. Just hearing that name was enough to shake their courage. In their fear, they forgot what God had done for them. The memory of the Nephilim was enough to turn the people away from the promise that had been given to them. What stands out is how the Nephilim, even though they aren't the focus of the story, still shaped what happened. Their name lived on in the minds of the people. Generations after the flood, the thought of them was enough to stop Israel in its tracks. Whether the people in Canaan truly were their descendants, or whether the spies exaggerated to avoid danger, the association carried enough fear to cause a crisis. The people forgot God's power and focused only on the giants. The shadow of the Nephilim was enough to make them lose heart. Their focus shifted from God's promises to their own weaknesses. In the Book of Numbers, the Nephilim are not explained in any more detail, but their presence in the story shows how much influence their legend had. They were not just physical giants, they were symbols of fear, reminders of how human hearts can be overwhelmed when they forget who walks with them. The Israelites saw themselves as small and weak. They believed they couldn't win. That one image of themselves as grasshoppers says so much. They had seen God part the sea, bring down plagues on Egypt, and provide food in the desert. But in the face of giants, they forgot. The legend of the Nephilim was strong enough to make them question everything. When we look at these two appearances in Genesis and Numbers, we see more than just history. We see a spiritual truth about the world. In Genesis, the Nephilim are part of a broken world heading toward judgment. In Numbers, they become symbols of fear, pulling a new generation away from faith and obedience. These moments are separated by time, but they are connected by the same story. A story where human strength, when not grounded in God, becomes dangerous. A story where fear can steal hope. The Nephilim may not be the main characters, but their impact is lasting. They remind us of how spiritual rebellion can reach across generations if left unchecked. They are part of the world's fall, and they also stand in the way when that world tries to rise again. In the Book of Enoch, the story of the Nephilim begins with the arrival of a group of angels known as the Watchers. These beings were not rebels from the start. They were originally sent to earth with a purpose: to watch over humanity, to observe, and to report what they saw. For a time, they carried out this responsibility. But as they looked more closely at human life, something within them shifted. They became drawn to the beauty of human women, and what started as observation turned into desire, something they were never meant to experience. Their leader, Semjaza, was aware of the seriousness of what they were about to do. He feared that if he acted on his own, the others would leave him to face judgment alone. So he convinced them to act together. He made them take a mutual oath, binding themselves in agreement so that they would all share the same fate no matter what happened. Once the agreement was sealed, they descended to earth during the days of Jared. There, they took human women as wives and began something that would change the course of history. From these unnatural unions came the Nephilim, giants unlike anything the world had ever seen. They were not only massive in size, but their hunger and strength were unmatched. In the beginning, they lived among humans, but it wasn't long before their true nature emerged. Their appetites grew beyond what the land could provide. They consumed crops, livestock, and whatever resources they could find. Eventually, their hunger turned toward humans themselves. Violence followed them everywhere, and the destruction they caused swept across the land. But it wasn't just physical ruin. Their presence brought spiritual decay. The world itself began to change under their influence, as if the weight of their actions bent the very fabric of creation. The Watchers were not only responsible for the Nephilim, they also introduced knowledge that humanity was never meant to have. One of the leading angels, Azazel, taught people how to make weapons, swords, knives, and armor, unleashing the tools of war and bloodshed. He also taught the crafting of mirrors and ornaments, introducing vanity and manipulation. Other Watchers shared secrets about spells, enchantments, astrology, the signs in the sky, and the power hidden in herbs and roots. At first, these teachings may have seemed like gifts, signs of wisdom, but they brought confusion and imbalance. Knowledge that had not come from God spread across the earth, and people began to rely on powers they could not control. As the world changed, all of creation began to suffer. The blood of the innocent cried out from the earth. Animals were twisted by the corruption. People, once made to live in peace with one another and with God, became caught in a storm of sin, deceit, and the violence of the Nephilim. Even the natural world seemed to grieve. The sky, the waters, the land, everything seemed to bear the weight of what had been done. The world had become a place where righteousness could no longer take root. The giants ruled with cruelty, and the angels, who should have guarded creation, had instead betrayed it. Eventually, the suffering and cries of the righteous reached heaven. God heard them. In response, he sent 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, to act. Each one had a task. Azazel, who had taught the most damaging knowledge, was to be bound and cast into the desert, into a deep and dark pit, sealed off until the final day of judgment. The others, including Semjaza, were also to be imprisoned, buried under the mountains in fiery valleys where they would remain for ages. Their punishment was not instant destruction, but long-lasting confinement. They would live to see the downfall of their children, the Nephilim, and carry the weight of what their rebellion had caused. The Nephilim, too, met a violent end. The giants turned on each other, driven by anger and an unquenchable thirst for more. They fought and destroyed one another. Some were struck down by divine judgment, while others fell in the chaos they themselves had created. But their death did not bring peace. Because they were born from both heavenly and earthly origins, their spirits had no place to go. They could not return to God, and they could not pass away like ordinary people. Instead, their spirits became cursed, wandering the earth as restless, invisible forces. These spirits, once giants in flesh, became the dark, unseen enemies of mankind. These spirits, born in arrogance and violence, now move through the world without form. They stir temptation, spread deception, and draw people away from the truth. They have no rest and no place to belong. Instead, they roam, seeking the weak, the broken, and the rebellious. They feed on disorder and create chaos. Though the watchers were locked away, the spirits of their children were left behind, and those spirits still operate, still influence, and still threaten the hearts of those who live without God. The Book of Enoch also shares a moment involving the birth of Noah. When he is born, his father Lamech is alarmed by the child's unusual appearance and goes to Methuselah for answers. Methuselah then seeks out Enoch, who is still alive and walking with God. Enoch comforts them, explaining that Noah is not a child of the Watchers, but is chosen by God for a special purpose. God is preparing Noah to carry out a mission that will preserve life through a coming judgment. In this way, Noah's story becomes directly tied to the events caused by the Watchers and the Nephilim. He becomes a sign of hope in a world that had nearly been lost. In this telling, the flood is not just a reaction to general human sin. It is a direct act of cleansing, sent to remove the Nephilim and the corruption introduced by the fallen angels. It is a reset, a way to restore balance to a world that had been twisted out of shape. The flood ends the age of giants, but even after the waters go down, not all the effects disappear. The evil spirits of the Nephilim remain, and their influence continues to trouble the world. Their bodies were destroyed, but their spiritual legacy became part of the ongoing battle between what is godly and what is not. The Book of Enoch doesn't hold back in its description of what happened. It lays bare the cost of stepping outside of God's design, not only for the Watchers, but for everyone on earth. The giants brought destruction, not just through their violence, but through their presence. The secret knowledge brought by the Watchers gave birth to pride, vanity, sorcery, and war. What began with the admiration of beauty led to a disaster that almost tore the entire world apart. But woven through that story is the hand of God. He does not look away. He listens. He steps in. His actions are not distant or delayed. They are purposeful and personal. He sends his angels not just to punish, but to heal what had been broken. His decision to send the flood, to imprison the Watchers, and to preserve Noah was not about wiping things out in anger. It was about protecting what was still good. He made a way forward for the future. The Book of Enoch gives us a powerful view of a time when heaven and earth collided, when angels walked among people and giants ruled the land. But more than that, it helps us understand the ongoing struggle we face today. The evil in the world didn't begin with random acts of disobedience. It began with a spiritual rebellion that altered creation itself. The Nephilim were not just giants in stature. They were the sign of a world that had lost its way. And yet, even in that chaos, God moved. He brought justice, He made a plan, and He gave humanity another chance. The Book of Jubilees tells the story of the Nephilim from a unique point of view. It doesn't just repeat what earlier texts said. It places the events on a carefully structured timeline. According to this account, the origin of the Nephilim began during the days of Jared, long before Noah was born. This period of history is described as a time when the spiritual state of the world was falling apart. Much of this decline started when the boundary between the heavenly and earthly realms was crossed. The angels, called watchers in this text, left their appointed place in heaven and came down to earth. They took human women as wives, breaking a divine boundary and introducing a deep disturbance into an already fragile world. The children born from these unions were the Nephilim, giants with enormous strength and violent tendencies. They didn't just disrupt life, they turned everything upside down. These Nephilim were more than just large or powerful. They became a danger to everything around them. The Book of Jubilees describes how they ate far more than what was reasonable. They consumed all the food available, devoured livestock, and eventually turned against people. Their appetite, both physical and spiritual, led to destruction on every side. But it wasn't only the visible world that was suffering. The Nephilim brought with them a wave of rebellion. They lived without regard for God or His creation. They were born from a mixture of angelic and human nature, and as they grew, they caused chaos across the land. Their violence didn't just harm people. It polluted the earth, the animals, and even the plants. Everything that had been good and balanced was now twisted and broken. This wasn't simply recorded as a historical note. It mattered to heaven. The actions of the watchers and the destruction caused by their children reached the attention of God. Creation had been carefully ordered, but now it was breaking apart. The watchers had crossed a line that was never meant to be crossed. The response described in Jubilees is measured and full of purpose. God did not act in a rush. He considered everything and then made the decision to act. The flood wasn't just a punishment. It was a way to bring restoration. It was a divine answer to a situation that had gotten far beyond human control. The Book of Jubilees also explains what happened to the spirits of the Nephilim after their physical bodies were destroyed. Because they were born from both flesh and spirit, their death didn't end their existence. Their spirits continued to live, but they were no longer bound to bodies. These spirits became restless and dangerous. They had no place in heaven and could not enter the realm of the dead like ordinary people. So they stayed in the world, wandering invisibly, influencing and tempting those who were still alive. They became the cause of many spiritual struggles that followed. Their presence helped explain why the world still faced evil even after the flood had wiped away their bodies. As the time of the flood drew closer, Noah was deeply concerned. He didn't just look at the corruption around him. He also worried about what would happen after the flood. In his prayers, he asked God to deal with the spirits of the Nephilim. He feared that even if the physical world was cleansed, the invisible threats would remain. God listened to Noah's prayer and responded with a specific judgment. Most of the evil spirits would be bound and thrown into a place of punishment, but 1/10 of them would be allowed to remain. These would serve under a spiritual figure named Mastema, the chief over the evil spirits. This part of the story reveals something important. Even the spirits that remained were under God's control. Mastema was not given complete freedom. He could operate only within the limits set by God. He and the spirits under him were allowed to test and tempt people, but they could not defeat those who remained faithful to God. This explained why spiritual challenges would still be part of life, even after the flood. The world was no longer dominated by the giants, but spiritual warfare remained. The cause wasn't just human weakness. It was tied to events that began long before. The Book of Jubilees also gives great importance to teaching. After the flood, God gave Noah commandments and laws, not only for him but for his children and their descendants. These teachings were meant to protect future generations from falling into the same spiritual traps. The emphasis wasn't just on outward behavior. It was about helping families build strong foundations in truth so they could recognize and resist the influence of the remaining spirits. The solution to the spiritual threat wasn't just punishment, it was preparation. God gave his people what they needed to live with wisdom and righteousness. Another important theme in Jubilees is how time is structured. The book explains events using a sacred calendar of weeks, jubilees, and Sabbaths. Everything happens within a divine rhythm. The rebellion of the Watchers, the rise of the Nephilim, and the coming of the flood are all placed within this heavenly order. The message is clear. These events were not random. They were part of a timeline where justice, mercy, and judgment moved together. The calendar wasn't just for keeping track of time. It helped future generations understand that God's actions always followed a larger plan. Nothing happened outside his awareness or control. The Watchers, after their fall, are dealt with in a final and permanent way. They are buried beneath the earth, sealed in places of punishment until the time of the final judgment. Their story ends in silence and captivity, but their influence lived on through their children and the spiritual residue they left behind. Jubilees gives a picture of God as deeply involved, not distant. He doesn't allow evil to run free forever. He steps in to restore, to protect, and to cleanse what has been harmed. The removal of the Nephilim, the imprisonment of the Watchers, and the binding of the spirits all work together as part of this restoration. It's not just about ending evil. It's about making room for righteousness to grow again. Throughout the Book of Jubilees, one message repeats itself. When people step outside of God's design, disorder follows. But even then, God is not absent. He intervenes with both strength and care. The Nephilim, who once ruled the earth in terror, are brought to nothing. The spirits who try to carry their influence forward are restrained. The flood marks a turning point, not the end of humanity, but the beginning of a renewed world. Challenges remain, but the balance has been restored. Humanity is given another chance, and this chance is grounded in faith, obedience, and covenant. Jubilees tells the story of the Nephilim not just to explain what went wrong in the past, but to make sense of the struggles people still face in the present. Evil is not new. It didn't come out of nowhere. It has a history that stretches back to a deep and dangerous rebellion. But the book also makes it clear that evil does not win. God has already acted. He has set limits on darkness and given His people the tools to endure and overcome. And that brings us to the end of this journey through the story of the Nephilim, starting with what the Bible tells us and then stepping into the deeper details found in the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. Each account gave us a new angle, revealing how these ancient beings played a role not only in history, but in the spiritual patterns that continue to shape the world today. If this video helped you see things more clearly or opened your mind to ideas you hadn't considered before, go ahead and give it a like. That small action helps more people discover this content and explore these powerful topics with us. And if you're not yet part of this growing community, we would love to welcome you in. Just hit the subscribe button and make sure to turn on all notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. We've got more deep dives and powerful stories ahead, and we'd be honored to have you along for the journey. Thank you so much for watching, and may God bless you always as you continue to seek truth, grow in faith, and walk in His light.